On this episode, we cover the Joe Rogan Experience 1949 with guest Russell Brand. No Rogan Experience starts now. Welcome back to the show. This is a show where two podcasters, now with 190 hours of Rogan experience, get to know Joe Rogan. It's a show for those who are curious about Joe Rogan, his guests, and their claims, as well as for anyone who wants to understand Joe's ever-growing media influence. I'm Cecil Cicirello. That's Michael Marshall. Today, we're going to be covering Joe's March 2023 interview with Russell Brand. So, Marsh, how did Joe introduce Brand in the show notes?
Russell Brand is a comedian, actor, author, activist, and host of the podcast Stay Free with Russell Brand.
There should be a copious use of air quotes around a lot of those things in there. Is there anything else?
And in the future around staying free as well. We'll find that out.
Is there anything else we should know about Russell Brand?
Yeah, just so much. So for anyone who doesn't really know a great deal about Russell Brand, he was a massive star in the UK. He really was. He was a presenter, a comedian. He was even a film star for a while. He was so ubiquitous in the 2000s and the 2010, right across the British media. Like, he was so recognizable for his florid language and his quasi-Dickensian delivery. A lot of which we're going to see in the show as that we cover here. But he was also known for his skinny jeans, ridiculously back-combed hair. His act oscillated between pretentious, overly verbose imagery and then graphic allusions to his sex life. And we kind of go between the two. And this pretentiousness of his act carried him into fairly odd places. So in 2013, he gave a political interview to the BBC saying that he'd never voted in any election and never would, and actually instructed young people that you should not vote. All voting is meaningless because all the parties are the same. That was 2013. Wow. Then ahead of the 2015 election, he said he changed his mind and actually it was a good thing to vote and that young people should back Ed Miliband's Labour Party in order to oust David Cameron's Tory party. The thing is, by the time he announced his change of mind, voter registration was already closed and people who then followed his advice weren't able to vote.
That's not great.
Yeah, not great. When the pandemic hit, he became, he started to post videos about wellness and meditation and Buddhism to his YouTube channel. And then his channel rebranded to be all about the true news, which he called The Trues, where he pointed out how deceptive the media was. Like, as a collective, you can never trust the media.
Man.
That carried on. He moved his show over to Rumble, where he's publishing all manner of conspiracy theories about the pandemic, about lockdowns, about masks, about vaccines, and about how you definitely should never trust the media ever. Now, coincidentally, a little while after all of that, the media published a lengthy expose in which they spoke to multiple women who claimed they were sexually assaulted and raped by Russell Brand through his career.
Oof.
And the thing is, that is not a surprise because his behavior towards women was just an open secret on the UK comedy circuit, had been for years, that he was somebody who could not be trusted around women. 6 months after this interview with Joe Rogan, Channel 4 in the UK broadcast their investigation, which included allegations from a 16-year-old victim that Brand was dating while working for the BBC, who would send a car around to her school to pick her up after school and take her to his house, where he repeatedly and graphically assaulted her. Brand even allegedly jokingly referred to the victim to his friends as the child. That was his nickname for the 16-year-old he was dating at the time.
Yikes.
So, yeah, arguably, that pivot to telling people never to ever trust the media and then his subsequent radicalization into right-wing Christian evangelicism, it might be argued as somewhat strategic.
Yeah, no, it could be. So what did they talk about in this episode?
They talked about homelessness. They talked about Brand's experience with addiction, his early TV career. They talked about Joe Biden, NATO, Russia, war, COVID, the lab leak, Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Nancy Pelosi, whether Alex Jones is a shaman, whether Alex Jones was actually at fault at all about Sandy Hook. They talk about CNN and ivermectin, obviously. They talk about Big Pharma, the left-right paradigm, YouTube, Rumble, and how Joe manages his kids' screen time.
Okay. Well, before we get to our main event, we want to say thanks to our Area 51 all access past patrons. That's Stone Banana, Cindy Lynch. Yes, that's Cindy Lynch. Fred R. Gruthius, Darlene, Morgan Gordon. Marsh argued the earth is flat on TikTok.
God
Laura
damn it.
Williams. No, not that one. The other one. Lucy Cortez. Dr. Andrew Gibson, the online physics tutor. Matthew Cutler, autistic Twitch streamer. Scott Laird, Ramtam Tickler. Chonky Cat in Chicago has had enough of this BS. Billionaire Oligarchs, Carissa Gunderson, Angie Matke, Don't Thank Me, Your Show is Just Worth Investment, Stargazer 97, Left Hand Voodoo, Megan Bray, and dwee dow. I don't think I did that well enough. I think I need better direction. I need better stage direction.
Yeah, I think you just activated a Manchurian candidate in Morse code is what you just did there.
Either that or I started a 1997 modem. I'm not sure. I did one or the other. All right. They all subscribe to patreon.com/NoRogan. You can do that as well. All patrons get early access to ad-free episodes and a special patron-only bonus segment each week. And this week, we're going to find out how many calories it takes for you to get iPad time. You can check it out, patreon.com/NoRogan. Now, we're going to do a short pre-segment because Joe is again in the news. Joe is spending a lot of time in the news lately, and we are going to be talking about enlightened centrism on today's show. And these guys both sort of in this episode and in many other places, as Marsh mentioned in the beginning, Russell Brand has sort of had this idea for a long time that they are outside of this sort of left-right paradigm that we have in many of our countries. So before we get into the clips that sort of that show this in this particular episode that happened in 2023, we want to talk about this clip that's going viral. And this is where Joe talks about his politics now. And I want to play the clip for you. This was his conversation with Arsenio Hall from April 8th.
It's so stupid. I'm politically homeless. I've always been I've been politically homeless for a long fucking time. Neither one of them make any sense to me. We need like a logical centrist government that like just says like, there's a lot of things that we should do to make this country a better place. We can do these things and we don't have to attach them to left or right, and anything that the left says that's logical, the people on the right, they immediately dismiss it because it's coming from the left. And that happens the same where the left does it to people on the right. It's dumb. It's a team thing. It's like the Dolphins versus the Raiders. Yeah. It's just you pick a fucking team and you lay that team.
What a horrible
sucks.
game, by the way.
Okay, so yeah, Paul Joe Rogan is politically homeless. He feels that right now, but that's not even the only time he's claimed to be politically homeless. He talked about it in October 2024 when he was interviewing Francis Foster and Konstantin Kisin.
Just because of my appearance, there's always been this assumption that I'm some right-wing MAGA guy, which is I was a Bernie supporter. Mm-hmm. You know, I am not. I'm a politically homeless person for sure. You know, I always considered myself a left-wing person. I never thought I would ever vote right-wing. But then the tides of culture shifted in a very bizarre way.
So yeah, that was October 2024. He talked about it twice in shows in July 2025, first with Ryan Callahan and then with Joe DeRosa.
Well, what we need to do is be apolitical. And I think we were with this, which is beautiful. So the Democrats, the Republicans, and the people like me that are fucking politically homeless, they all came together on this and said, no, this is stupid. And a lot of people have that same feeling, that they felt politically homeless. Yes. Eric Weinstein talked about that. I've talked about it. You feel politically homeless because there's things you support on one side that you don't support on the other side. Like, what did we do? What is this? Like, why is this a part of it?
So that was July 2025. He actually talked about it with Graham Linehan in August 2025 in the show that we covered for an episode.
If you say anything that diverts from what a bunch of lunatics online have agreed is the truth, then you're far right.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, you can't. Everyone's politically homeless. We have to realize that. Start a shelter.
Yeah,
let's just call it the center.
Okay, and then most recently, October 2025, he was talking to Duncan Trussell, and once again, he was still politically unhoused.
That's why, like, I always feel politically homeless. Always. I really do. I feel like a complete political outcast on both sides.
Yeah, same.
I don't want to align with parties. I don't think that's smart.
So, yeah, as it turns out, Joe has been feeling politically homeless for quite a while now.
Yeah.
It's arguably the homelessness crisis he cares most about at this point.
Nicely
But
done.
Cecil, I think we can do him a solid here. I think the two of us can find Joe a home. What do you reckon?
Yeah, let me do a tiny rebuttal to the clips that you just played. These are, of course, most of these before your clips, except for the Konstantin Kisin one that you played. But this one I'm going to start in November. This is November of 2024. This is a conversation he had with Theo Vaughn. Now, this is November 8th. So I'll remind you that this happened right after the election, the last election when Donald Trump was elected.
Yo, how fun was election night at the mothership?
It was baffling, man. I mean, here, I'll tell you, it was it was crazy.
It was so much fun. We had such a good time. That green room was so positive.
Dude, my favorite part, at one point, they were playing that song, you talk about a revolution. And people were dancing. People were smoking weed. There was I think there was a baby smoking weed. Everybody was like, people were like, it was crazy, dude.
It felt
Adam and Eve were in there. There was just a lot going on.
It felt like America's brighter. That's what it felt like.
Sounds like he has a home there. Sounds like he had a home sweet home sign he put up somewhere. Hey, how about November 22nd of the same year? He talked to Scott Storch.
Like, you don't want to pay attention to that shit. You just want to live your life. You want to just be carefree and have fun and do the thing that you're passionate about. And meanwhile, the world is burning. And
you
just
can't do
hoping
anything
doesn't
about it.
get
It's
to
like
you.
at that high level, it's like there's nothing.
Well, we can. We voted Trump in, and
Yeah,
his idea is to stop all this shit, and hopefully he can do that.
Okay, again, sounds homeless. What about this clip? Now we listened to this show. This is one of the first shows we did. This was Mark Andreessen from November 26th.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. Yeah. Good to see you where the world's still functional.
It's amazing.
Yeah, amazing. We wanted to talk. You wanted to talk about the post-election sort of a wrap-up.
Yeah.
Sort of where we stand. Are you happy?
Very happy.
It was a weird one.
Morning in America.
That was one of the first times ever I felt hopeful after an election. Like, you should have seen the green room at the comedy club. Everybody was like, yes.
Yes.
Whoo.
We also covered this one too, Marsh. This was from Brett Weinstein in February of last year.
Good to see you, my friend.
Great to see you, Joe.
Wild times.
Almost unbelievable.
Yeah. The last time you were here, we were really worried about what was going to happen. And now it seems like we're in a completely different timeline.
Yeah, I have to say, in addition to being just overarchingly worried about what was going to happen to the Republic and to the globe, I was personally worried about what would happen to people like you and me if we lost.
Yeah. Probably wouldn't be so good for business. They probably would have cracked down.
There's that. But I must say, on my darker days, I had concerns even beyond that. And
you probably should.
Yeah.
Yeah, in light of what we now know.
So perhaps he decided, after seeing actual policy implementation from the Trump administration, to become homeless. But that seems a little doubtful, seeing as he walked out with Donald Trump at the latest UFC, shook hands with him, hung out with him. So it's hard to know where Joe actually stands. I think it's a little easier to see where he wants you to think he stands.
Either that, or it's hard to see where he stands versus where he wants himself to think that he stands. I think there's a level of pretending to himself here that he doesn't want to accept the political position he actually feels most comfortably close to. So he will say he's homeless, but he will pitch his tent on very specific lawns every time.
Certainly will. All right, so now we're going to go to our main event.
It's time!
Here's thank you to this week's veteran voice of the podcast. That was Kenny Weiland of Kenny and Kyle's App Company announcing our main event. Remember that you too can be on the show by sending us a recording of you giving us your best rendition of It's Time. You can send that to noroganpod@gmail.com, as well as how you would like to be credited on the show. This whole main event is going to be talking about this enlightened centrism. Both the Democrats and the Republicans are bad, and we're going to hear this from both Russell Brand and from Joe Rogan. In a lot of ways, Joe Rogan matches the exact energy that Russell brings in, which is we're not politically one-sided. We are picking and choosing our which policies we like from either side.
Yeah, that's true. Although I actually think what we'll hear is a slightly different version of a kind of a non-left-right paradigm from each of the guys. Because Joe wants to see himself, I think he's going to portray himself as fairly centrist, whereas Brand is going to portray himself as outside of that whole paradigm and above it. And we'll kind of hear how those two kind of dynamics will play out.
So we're going to start out about 10 minutes into the show. They start to talk about authority and faith in leaders.
I think it's a very strange time where I don't think people have a lot of faith right now in institutions, and I don't think they have a lot of faith in authority. I don't think they really believe that there is someone who is wiser than them, that has a grand plan, that's logical, that's workable, where they're looking out for all of us. So I think there's like a feeling of chaos that exists today that I don't think has ever existed in my life like this before. Even back during like the Bush administration, when everybody thought Bush was a moron, they still thought there's a good cabinet and they're following all the checks and balances, even though they're probably extracting too much money, and there's probably a lot of cronyism and a lot of undercover deals and a lot of like no bid contracts with Halliburton and that kind of nonsense. He still thought they have things pretty under control. It's a very solid institution. Nobody believes that now. You see Pete Buttigieg and fucking Kamala Harris and Biden can't get a sentence out. You're like, this is madness. These people are utter fools, and these are the people that are running everything, and these are the people that are getting us on the brink of war with Russia. And I don't have any faith in them, and I think most people don't.
I think you're right.
It's interesting framing there, talking about a brink of war with Russia. That sounds like he totally swallowed the Russian propaganda about how and why the Ukraine war started. There's a lot of ways. We talked about this on other shows. There's a lot of ways to negotiate with your neighbors. You don't have to just start a land war with them to negotiate with them.
Yeah, exactly. And when you hear the start of that clip, it's easy to forget that this is him talking in 2023, because he's talking about people don't believe that out there's someone who's got a plan that's logical, that's workable. I've never seen such chaos. But he's not talking about being under the current Trump regime. Yeah. This isn't how he talks about the political landscape right now in 2026. This is him talking about under Biden.
Yeah.
And he's talking about, the feeling the chaos from leadership, that the people in charge aren't looking out for the average person under Biden's leadership. And his point, even as he gets into it, is that, look, even though George Bush was bad, his cabinet was competent. But Kamala and Biden and Pete Buttigieg and the people around them, they're all fools who are driving US into war, and it's right not to have faith in them. And the elephant in the room here is obviously Trump's first term. Because Joe can't throw forward to the Trump second term, but he's completely glossing over Trump's first term, despite offering a really good illustration of a cabinet of chaos that weren't interested in long-term strategic plans or the plights of the average American.
Yeah.
And, the second elephant in the room is that Joe is about a year out from endorsing Trump to come back and do a second term. But, what we see from him here is setting up the idea that you can't trust either side, whether it's Bush or whether it's Biden, who's even worse, neither of them care about you.
Yeah. I want to just for 1 second talk a little bit about their framing of Ukrainian conflict with Russia, because this comes up a lot in this episode. We're going to skip a lot of clips, but I definitely think it's important to talk about a couple of things. In this episode, they talk about how there was a coup in 2014. They say that over and over again. There's this coup, 2014 coup, 2014 coup. The Ukrainian people refer to it as a revolution. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. they're not respecting how the Ukrainians even look at this. The words have different meanings. A coup means a small actor in the government overthrows the government. A revolution means that the people rise up and overthrow the government. And there's a very big difference between that. And there's a framing there that is purposeful. And they do that throughout the episode. They don't use the word revolution. They use the word coup over and over and over again. And
yeah, exactly. And it's based on exactly what you said about the Russian propaganda, which is that this wasn't the Ukrainian people rising up. This was the American government fomenting revolution as part of a coup. So that it was America who overthrew the government there by fomenting the revolution. So it's to delegitimize the feelings of the people. And as you say, Russell Brand and Joe here have both swallowed it.
Yeah, and they do it throughout the episode. We're not going to play a ton of tape based on that, but I want to mention it because it's a big piece of this. And just as an aside, even if it's true, like let's say like that somehow all it comes out and it shows like there was some sort of push by the United States government to help push them to do this sort of thing, and it was exactly how it's framed. That still doesn't mean you invade your neighbor. Imagine if Russia had done the same thing to our neighbor, Canada. If they had gone to Canada and they had pushed for some other type of government in Canada, that doesn't mean that the United States gets to invade them because they have changed their government. We don't get to invade the other country. There's other things you can do. It doesn't make any sense. They seem to skip over all that entire part to somehow justify this war that's happening in Ukraine. So they shift on about a couple minutes later, they start talking about identity.
This is what's interesting for me is as we navigate this new and emergent space of being able to present counter narratives and continually, like all of us now have like experienced, oh, you're a right wing conspiracy theorist. You've joined the alt-right. You're a gateway to this, the dark web, all of that language that grows up around it. Like this, and I've heard you speak about this obviously a lot, but the truth is that who isn't sympathetic? Anyone that's got a family or loves someone is sympathetic to the idea that people are going to have various types of identity around culture and religious expression and racial expression. And this is a conversation that the whole culture has to be involved in together. What my issue is, I don't think they believe in that stuff. I don't think they care. I don't think that they are creating an agenda to advance the interests of vulnerable people. I think they are using it as a distraction and a veil in order to carry on with the same kind of corporate and financial interests that have always determined what the establishment is. And if there's one thing we can point to in our lifetime, it's that the liberal establishment has become co-opted by the same forces that traditionally we regarded the right to have been co-opted by: military, industrial complex, financial industry. And there's palpable evidence for that. And in order to not acknowledge that transition's taken place, they're able to keep the cultural conversation going. We care about your right to express yourself and your identity. That's a way of not acknowledging we're just the same. We're pro-war.
Would Joe's show even exist without identity politics? He literally cannot stop talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. And like, look at what we see about this left-right paradigm here from Brand. So Brand is saying here that the left and right, they're both bad, but Brand is like navigating what he calls is this new emergent space that's neither of those things. And his argument is that the left, they don't really want to help the vulnerable or allow people to express their identity. That is all just a cover for them being just as bad as the right have always been. So it's all the same.
And that's such a great point because people forget that when they use whataboutism, it doesn't make your side look any better if the criticism is valid, right? He's not lifting up the right at all here. He's basically saying the right is as bad as the left.
Yeah, and he's saying, look, the right is bad, and then the left have been co-opted by the same forces that rule the right, and therefore we can dismiss the left just as we dismiss the right, which means there's no point voting at all.
Yeah.
So, so much for that change of heart that he had in 2015 and thought voting was decent again, that didn't last.
Yeah.
But the important thing throughout all of this, the conclusion is at least Russell Brand is smart enough to be able to see through all of that. He's smarter than the system. He's more enlightened. He's above it all, and he can really see the mechanism behind it all, and he's telling you like it is.
All right, so we're going to play 3 clips. They all happen in a row. We're not going to cut any tape. This is specifically, we're keeping this in because the first 2 bolster the third, and you need the 2 in order to get to the third one. And the third one is about this sort of enlightened centrism, but they start talking about Alex Jones and David Icke.
These characters that have become so maligned and marginalized, even in my lifetime where I still worked in mainstream media, people like Alex Jones or David Icke, they were like, even people that were skeptical about them or even people that ridiculed them didn't try to posit them as dangerous. Like, and the same, I'm assuming, with Robert Kennedy. They were sort of
the David Icke one, they always made fun of him for lizard people. Because he always would say that there's shapeshifters and they're lizards, and there was no evidence. It just seemed really preposterous. And then in the beginning of the pandemic, he was trying to connect COVID with 5G. There was a lot of weird, like, he's got some squirrely ones. Believe it or not, like, it's hard to say, like, to the general public, Alex Jones is way more reliable than David Icke. But he's way more reliable than David Icke.
Alex Jones is way more reliable than David Icke are certainly words you can put in a sentence. That is definitely something you could say. Yes.
And the thing is, to talk about Alex Jones and David Icke, Russell Brand in 2026 and arguably in 2023 is only distinguishable from Alex Jones and David Icke because he's the one who's been arrested for rape. That is the only difference between Brand, Jones, and Icke, really.
Wow.
And yeah, here's Joe in 2023 still asserting that Alex Jones is reliable in any degree. This isn't him distancing himself from all the things that Alex Jones has said and done. He's saying, like, you know, he's still more reliable, way more reliable than David Icke.
I will point people back to that timeline because it's sometimes we forget how things get mashed up. Sometimes we don't remember exactly when things happen. But at this point, 2023, he was found liable for malicious misinformation and had a $1.2 billion judgment against him. He would later lose an appeal on that judgment later in the year. But at this point, he had been, by two different courts, had been shown that his misinformation had caused severe harm, $1.2 billion worth.
Yeah, and what Brand is saying here is, like, even back in the day, people would recognize that David Icke and Alex Jones were saying things that maybe weren't true, but they wouldn't call them dangerous. And he's sort of saying that it's a failing of the modern era that now misinformation is considered dangerous. And the thing is, to that point, if people 15 years ago didn't think Alex Jones and David Icke were dangerous, that was a failing of journalism at the time. And we've learned better now what happens when we see that misinformation as harmless and don't consider it dangerous. Like, we are a product of the times of, isn't David Icke and Alex Jones and the misinformation that flows around online, isn't it fun and silly? And it's not true, but it's probably harmless. This is where you end up in the world that we're in now. So, yeah, we've learned that it's dangerous. We just went through a pandemic that taught us how dangerous misinformation can truly be.
This is not skipping any tape. Like we said, this is a second piece of that. This is, again, them covering for Alex Jones.
Alex made a tremendous mistake with Sandy Hook, and he did that in a time of his life where he's experiencing a psychotic break. He was drinking a lot, and he was having a mental breakdown, and he really believed that everything was a conspiracy and that the government is essentially run by these evil demons who are trying to depopulate America and ruin people. And he thought they were trying to take away people's guns, and he was convinced that someone had convinced him. I don't know what documentaries or what videos he saw, but he was convinced that they were using crisis actors and that they were orchestrating a false flag. He was obviously very wrong.
Yes.
And has admitted that he was wrong about that, but he's been right about a lot of things, so many things. And I've talked about this many times, but he was the guy who told me about Epstein's Island more than a decade ago, and I thought it was the craziest thing I'd ever heard. I was like, what are you saying? There's an island, like it sounds like a plot in a movie. There's an island where they fly famous rich scientists and politicians, and they compromise them with underage girls and get it on film so they could use it against them. I'm like, what? That sounds like horseshit. That sounds like lizard people. It sounds like, 5G creates COVID. Same thing.
Yeah.
But turns out it was true. And it's one of many things. He was the first one to warn me about a social credit score system. He's like, they're going to try to implement a social credit score system, and your money is going to be tied. They'll have centralized digital currency, and your money will be tied to your social credit score system. And you step out of line, you won't be able to buy things. You won't be able to travel. You won't be able to do anything. They're going to try to keep you within a 15-minute radius of your home, and they're starting to do that in places.
Yeah,
all of it's real. And in China, the social credit score system is 100% real and implemented.
this might seem like Joe is distancing himself from what Alex Jones said about Sandy Hook, but I would argue this is Joe giving Alex complete cover for it. This is Joe working a path to forgiveness that doesn't include accountability. Because the stuff that Alex Jones said about Sandy Hook, well, that was a tremendous mistake. Like, whoops, who hasn't accidentally libeled the families of dead children before? But he was going through a breakdown. He was drinking a lot, and someone convinced him of that. This was information that he'd seen that convinced him. So in many ways, all of this, it wasn't Alex's fault that he said those things repeatedly about the families of the Sandy Hook victims. It was all these other mitigating circumstances that Joe is bringing up in order to give Alex cover. What he's not pointing out is that Alex Jones has subsequently gone back on admitting that he was wrong about this stuff. And he's actually repeated the libel multiple times on his show and in other kind of places. So does Joe think Alex Jones keeps having repeated relapses or keeps accidentally stumbling across somebody else who reconvinces him that it's fake?
Yeah, really good point. I think, Joe, of course, here is talking about the Epstein files and how this sort of stuff has happened. He explains that people are being compromised. These scientists and important people are being compromised with sexual, blackmail. And we still don't have, even after the Epstein files released, we still don't have a lot of evidence that happened.
Yeah, and he's speaking here in 2023, but as we've seen now, even with the information, the new information that we have, or the information that we have, Joe's view of the Epstein files hasn't changed based on new information. To him, it is still just a compromise operation in which the victims were mechanisms and objects of blackmail and not victims in their own right.
Yeah, and there is one thing that he does say that is true. They are starting to keep you within a 15-minute radius of your home. That's real. It's called Chicago traffic. It's how they keep you close to your home, and that's 15 minutes.
And the gas prices.
Yeah, gas prices. 15 minutes in Chicago traffic is actually just 2 city blocks. That's all it is. I do want to talk about the psychotic break thing because it seems like he's giving Alex Jones some sort of permission to do the things he did because he had a psychotic break. It's his fault. Think about this differently. If Alex had a psychotic break and he was near a gun, he could do some real damage. Well, I will point out that he had access to hundreds of thousands of people and he could convince them of some crazy stuff and he did some real damage there. And Joe's language feels like it's removing a lot of guilt here, but that is the things he did were almost as damaging as if he were to have a pistol available to him.
Yeah.
This is the clip we wanted to get to. Those are the first two. We had to talk a little bit about the Alex Jones stuff and how Joe is kind of pushing some of the blame away from Alex Jones. But this is now what we get to, which is the enlightened centrism stuff around Alex Jones.
Because when you think about some of the stuff that Alex Jones has said, and putting aside Sandy Hook and that acknowledged difficulty and transgression, like that. Some of it's as rhetoric is amazing. Like they yes, there are sort of centralized systems of corruption that bypass democracy, and ultimately there is an agenda that can bypass administrative change. Policies that come out under the Republicans are pursued by the Democrats, and then and the military-industrial complex are able, through lobbying and through their overt and covert connections to government, able to dictate foreign policy. At least influence foreign policy. All of these things you can sort of demonstrate financially. But when you start to describe it in terms of demons and reptiles, the kind of language that like even 500 years ago was the ordinary way that, he's a preacher, isn't he, Alex Jones? He's somewhere between a shaman and a preacher. He operates in that space. And in a way, you need people on the cultural periphery to be able to say, watch out, watch the direction we're going in. Because the thing is that the way that we're behaving at the moment is all underwritten by rationalism. This is the, follow the science. This is the rational thing. Putin but it's just as inaccurate. It's not true either. Now, of course, like when you start talking about, UFOs until very recently, or lizard people or shapeshifters, you're entering into a territory that makes it easy for you to be ridiculed, makes it easy for you to be taken down. Now, so the times that they are accurate or correct, like even because if you think of the way that you were framed around the pandemic period, it's like, has far-right people on, conspiracy theorists, and of course that they've obviously got an agenda, and it's their agenda that is driving the discourse, not the facts of the matter.
So, this is Brand's view of it all. First of all, just notice that he describes Sandy Hook, what Alex Jones said about the families of the Sandy Hook victims, as an acknowledged difficulty and transgression. You know, like this is you've used the wrong cutlery at a fancy dinner kind of thing. You committed a social faux pas. No, you libeled the families of dead children multiply and repeatedly until members of your audience were harassing those grieving parents. That's what actually happened here. And then from there, he's going on to, and the Republicans and the Democrats, well, they're just as bad as each other. You know, they're just as in hoc to the military-industrial complex. And people like Alex Jones and Joe Rogan are calling that out, and they're right to. But Alex's issue is that he'll then slip into language that was misunderstood because it was shamanic in nature. He was a shaman preacher figure. Now, I don't think a lot of shamans or preachers routinely defile the memories of dead kids. That is not the issue with Alex Jones, is that he's too shamanic to be understood in our times. And then Brand comes into, and you know, rationalism, well, it's not less right or wrong than other ways of considering the world. It's not like rationalism is better than any other way of considering the world. So really, who is to say like anything about anything ever? Who's to know anything about all this? All these different options, they're all just equally true. But the thing is, the facts of the matter when they are facts that are being denied. There is an objective reality to which in which we all live, and you can't just ascend yourself out of the left-right paradigm and beyond the reach of fact. And that's what he's trying to do here, is like, well, Alex Jones, you can say what you like about him, but all this stuff that he's saying, he's right about the Democrats or Republicans being as bad as each other. And that's why they came for him, because he recognized that the left-right system was bullshit.
Okay, so this next clip is they're skipping ahead a few minutes, and then they start again talking about how both parties are the same.
And I think that the entire mainstream culture has actually found itself on a kind of a peninsula, that where there is insignificant variety, in my view, between the two parties, which is why they're so willing to remain engaged in cultural war discourse and the conventional hot button topics in this country in particular around the pro-life, pro-choice and guns arguments. They're willing to remain in that territory because financially and economically they are ultimately aligned, that the most powerful interests in America are happy with either outcome. I think that what's happened in the media space is they've unwittingly found themselves in a place where there's a kind of that incompetence was afforded, that they're not used to being challenged, that the assumption was that you would be sunk by that narrative, that it was an insignificant new space. And obviously it was a massive miscalculation because they weren't watching what was happening. They weren't listening to the conversations with McCulloch and Malone and Weinstein, and that it is apolitical, and that also that in order to make themselves seem distinct from one another, they have amplified their small differences to the point where they don't recognize actually that isn't America anymore. That people like that, even when I was a kid, if someone was just like right wing, that's just like, oh, that's a right wing person. Like you've been your family around your table. I read something about Tucker Carlson the other day, like, you know, because of the release of those January the 6th documents to Fox and to Tucker in particular. And it said far right journalist Tucker Carlson. If Tucker Carlson's not far right, he's like a normal right wing guy. Far right means marching and red, white, and
I've
black
seen
flags.
me written as far right.
Far right.
They've described me as far right.
Tattoos on the face, extreme boots. You know, like far right's not just like, oh, I believe in Christianity and like, stuff like that. That's so the rhetoric has become hysterical.
So, yeah, this is absolutely textbook Russell Brand. He starts off saying the entire mainstream culture has actually found itself on a kind of peninsula. So, mainstream culture is metaphorically an outcrop surrounded on almost all sides by water. Is that a useful metaphor, or was it just a phrase that felt smart at the time, as long as you don't examine it at all, at which point it's pretty clear it doesn't mean anything?
Yeah.
We're going to cover this in the toolbox. He does this an awful lot. It's what we're going to call brandstanding throughout all of this. And he does this an absolute load in this conversation. But what he's arguing here is, really, left, right, it doesn't matter, because the powerful in America are happy with either outcome on guns or abortion. They don't mind if guns are legal or banned, if abortion's legal or banned, because economically it's all the same to the people in power. I'd argue that this is a politically and culturally illiterate take. I think it actually matters an awful lot to some of the powerful lobby groups, for example, in America, whether abortion is legal or not. And that's why we saw things like Project 2025, where some very rich people put an awful lot of their resources into a very long-term strategic project in order to remove access to abortion and to enshrine other kind of Christian supremacist values into the American political system. Brand is just missing all of that because he thinks he's above all of that. The rich, the powerful, whatever happens, they'll be fine, so they don't care either way. Nobody cares. And then he goes on to McCulloch and Malone and Weinstein. You know, the media maligned them, but really the media didn't spot that those conversations with McCulloch and Malone and Weinstein were all just apolitical. Now, we listened to Joe's conversation with Brett Weinstein. Brett Weinstein dedicates shows to how bad pornography is and how yuck trans people are, and how really the right solution for society is that young people to commit to having no sex before marriage. But he's politically neutral. These are all positions with absolutely no political persuasion at all, just purely apolitical. Again, for all that Russell Brand wants to see things as apolitical, he's missing the real details here. He's arguing, he even says here, that the gaps between people, he's arguing the gaps between the left and the right are small differences that the media is amplifying and that powers that be are amplifying in order to keep you locked in the left-right the system and at each other's throats. All of this is, whether he realizes it or not, normalizing of the far right. It may well be that he doesn't recognize he's doing it because he's just so high on his own supply at this point. Like, Tucker Carlson is far right. You can say what you like about Tucker Carlson. You can't deny that his politics are far right. He is a white nationalist, 100%. You know, he was on board with Orban. He was in Russia praising Putin. The stuff he says in his show make it pretty clear that he is far right.
Yeah.
Brand is saying, well, he can't be far right because he's not all tattoos and jackboots. But there are different ways to be far right. Not everyone under a Klan hood has a swastika tattoo on their forehead.
True, man.
Some of those people were respectable judges and local politicians.
Yeah.
That's what the hood was for.
Police
so you
officers.
didn't see that.
Yeah, exactly. I think what a lot of times the centrists, when they do this enlightened centrism, they'll miss that the Overton window is constantly shifting, right? So the Overton window is the idea that the window of our culture is shifting to the right constantly. There's sort of a shift, especially in American culture.
Or it can be shifted to the right. It can be shifted to the left by extreme positions.
Our current system is shifting it to the right.
Yeah, we haven't seen it go left for some time.
I mean, theoretically, it could go left, Marsh. Theoretically, it could go left. What we've seen constantly, though, is a mischaracterization of things on the left that are so extreme. So, for instance, Joe will talk about open borders. He will say, well, they had an open border for 4 years, and that's why they're doing these extreme policies now, is because there was an open border, even though he doesn't understand that that's not true, and that this is essentially shifting the rhetoric over so that people become more comfortable with things like mass deportations, violently deporting people, or going to places where you traditionally wouldn't go to deport them, or catching them outside of their, regular immigration hearings that they were using to try to become citizens, capturing them and throwing them in custody and then deporting them. Those are things that you seem to be okay with now because we've changed the rhetoric on this and pushed it so far right that now any left position feels almost ridiculous. And that's what this essentially is. Listen to Joe back in 2019, back in the 2020s even. Joe's talking a ton of shit about Trump. Listen to where he is now. Joe will say he hasn't changed, but Joe has changed. Joe's views have changed quite a bit. He just doesn't realize that he's in the stream too. He's not outside of it. He's in the stream and he's constantly being pulled right.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And actually, there's been a lot of headlines recently saying that that Joe has criticized Trump for not being as extreme and as MAGA as Hillary Clinton or Obama's rhetoric. And we've heard him do that before to say, like, well, if you listen to Hillary Clinton and Obama, the things they were saying were more MAGA than Trump. And he's doing that to say that the left and the right are both the same. Like, all the headlines are saying he's criticizing Trump for not going far enough. That isn't what he's doing when he does that. What he's doing is saying Trump isn't actually that extreme. He's just kind of in the normal conversation.
Right.
And what you're missing is the stuff that Hillary and Obama were saying about the border would have been enforced in vastly different ways to what you're seeing Trump doing routinely now.
Yeah.
So you can say that both their goals was to secure the border, but if through one of those you're talking about path to citizenship and DACA and Dreamers and stuff, and the other you're sending armed men into Home Depots to collect immigrant workers, those are different things, even if the rhetoric can be painted the same way from a distance.
Now, this is happening during the Biden presidency, obviously 2023. So they're going to talk about Biden, and they're also going to talk about diversity in this next clip.
Bizarre how far he's deteriorated. And when I was talking about it during the election, and people were like, I was actually talking about it with Eric Weinstein, and he was like, I can't vote for Biden. And he goes, I can't vote for Trump. And I go, I would vote for Trump before I'd vote for Biden, just because I think with Biden, like he's gone. Like, he's gone. You're going to be relying on his cabinet. And I knew his cabinet would be this fucking sideshow of diversity, and which is exactly what it is. I mean, that one person who stole all the women's clothes, that Sam Brinton, we highlighted on the podcast yesterday, like, that's a diversity hire. You just said, oh, look at this. A man who dresses like a woman and has a beard and a mustache, but also wears lipstick. This is perfect for us. I don't give a fuck what this guy's good at or bad at. I don't give a fuck what their credentials are. This makes us look like we're inclusive. This makes us look like we're on the right side. So let's hire this person. And you can't have those kind of people running a Ben and Jerry's. You certainly can't have those kind of people running the fucking most powerful government the world's ever known. It's nuts. It's nonsense.
What they've been able to do is introduce contentious issues to the forefront of the culture that prevent the kind of alliances that are necessary taking place.
So what we've seen here is that Joe apparently can recognize when presidents are showing very obvious signs of mental decline and where they're relying entirely on their cabinets. So he could do that in 2023. That is a faculty that Joe seems to have lost 3 years later under the Trump regime. Maybe it's Joe's decline that we should be studying here. But no, here's the real reason. Like, the sycophants and the ghouls that are surrounding Trump, they're not gay or trans or people of color, which is why Joe feels better about Trump and his cabinet than Biden's. And that's what he's saying here when he says, I'd rather go for Trump than Biden because Trump isn't going to have these sideshows of diversity. Because to Rogan, anybody who is trans or gender non-conforming is by definition a diversity hire. If you're there and you are gay, you're trans, you're visibly gender non-conforming, that is why you were hired. It's nothing else. If you were a trans person or a woman or a person of color who happens to be the best candidate, no, you weren't. It was the fact that you were trans is why Biden hired you, or why people who care about equality and equity hiring you. And that is what Joe's seeing here. And he talks particularly about someone who was part of the Biden's cabinet and got arrested for stealing luggage. What this shows is that if you are someone who is trans or gender non-conforming, you have to be perfect. If you do anything wrong, it's not about you as an individual. It's about you as a representative of a class of people. People from all sorts of backgrounds can do all sorts of things. It's not necessarily tied to their identity, but for Joe, it always is. And that's what we kind of see here. The number of straight, cis, white guys who get involved with, say, the Trump's cabinet, who then go on to do very bad things. Joe doesn't say, well, that's why you can't have straight, cis, white guys in the cabinet, because look what the kind of things that they do here. And honestly, I think this was one of the clearest signs before the election that Joe was going to go all in for Trump hard. For all of his wanting to position himself as a centrist or above the left-right paradigm, as politically homeless, as wanting a bit of this and a bit of that, as I'm interested in what policies you have, I don't care about teams. This is a sign that all of that is nonsense, because at the end of the day, he wanted Trump over Biden because Biden's cabinet would include people that make Joe feel icky.
Yeah. And that's the key. They try to make it seem like this person isn't qualified, and they were chose very specifically because of their diversity and not because of what they are. They're actually a graduate at MIT with masters in basically two different disciplines. So it's not like this person is underqualified and they were chosen because of that. They were chosen because of their qualifications. And that bothers Joe because that person is qualified and looks very different than what he thinks qualified should look like.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas he will not criticize Kash Patel as the head of the FBI or the billion other people who get hired in Trump's cabinet.
Exactly. And now they're going to continue talking about Biden here.
Now, like,
Right.
I feel sometimes that Joe Biden is the perfect president for the time because he's like the perfect metaphor of what it is. This system is over. And for all of the talk of diversity, what have you got? You've got a career politician, white male that's falling apart before your very eyes. It's telling you that it's bullshit.
Yes.
And that they'll put people in positions in order to carry that narrative, but for no other reason, because I don't truly believe that they deeply care about those ideas. And even if they do deeply care, the decisions they're making are decisions that are in alignment with the agenda of Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, with centralized banking authority. It's not going to change the world for any of them. They've managed to make ordinary American people hate one another, like on the basis of a 50-50 split. You can't criminalize half of a country and say that they're far-right fascists any more than you can say that, in my view, extreme leftists. These kind of issues oughtn't be what's determining how a country is run. And when they are the issues that determine how a country is run, the powerful run amok. The elites are able to pursue their agenda just fine.
Yeah, because they've got us in these ideological camps, and they've got people infighting and ignoring real problems.
Yes.
And it's such a transparent hustle. It's so obvious to see how it's being set up and how easy it is to get people to fall in line with it.
It's so obvious to us enlightened people sitting here talking on these microphones how this is a hustle. Aren't we so smart? Hold on a second. About a year and a half, I'm going to endorse one of these people.
Yeah, exactly. And look, Brand, a couple of times in the clips that we've played here, a couple of times in parts that we haven't played, he'll say he doesn't believe that the people on the left deeply care about the principles of the left. Yeah. Now, he doesn't offer any evidence for that at all, but also he never levels that accusation at the right wing at all for all his enlightened centrism. And maybe that's because he's on the path, he was already on the path at this point where he was going to endorse and fully support Donald Trump, which is what he did. But the way he'll portray that is, well, yeah, but those ideas, they're not right wing. That's just how everybody thinks, really deep down, secretly. Even the Democrats, even the left. The left will say they don't think this way, but I don't believe them. I still think they think the same way we all do. It's just that they are the ones pretending to care about something. Meanwhile, it's the Democrats, it's the left that apparently made everyone hate each other because they called Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump, and the Jan 6th riots fascist. That's divisive and hateful rhetoric. How dare you call those things fascist? Obviously, nobody really called half the country fascist at all. They've been called like half of Americans fascist. No one is doing that. What they did was call the politicians that are enacting fascist policies fascists, and their supporters in the media fascists, and the people who would take the lead from these people to then go and say, like, attack the Capitol and try to bring Democratic politicians to a gallows to hang. Yeah, those are fascists too. It's reasonable to call a fascist, and anything other than that is nonsense. But again, you look at where Brand and even Joe here are apportioning the blame. And then when you see where the blame is going, you've got to ask whether these guys really are above the left-right paradigm as they both believe they are. And I would say they're not.
Yeah. This next clip is, again, talking about both sides and, be happy. Both sides are equally bad.
Fucking do whatever you want to do, but you gotta leave everybody else alone. And so many people want to control other people because they don't have control of their own life. And this is a characteristic that you see from the ideological left on social media and from the ideological right. You see it from the right with wanting to control women's access to abortions. You see it from, wanting to limit access to this country and immigration. You see it from wanting to restrict guns and wanting to restrict drugs. You see it from all sorts of different ways that people want to control people and control people's behavior. And that creates these ideological rifts, that creates these tribal sort of like mentality borderlines that you cannot cross. And this is a problem when we have, so many variations, so much variety of human beings, but so just two choices. You're either a Democrat or you're a Republican. And if you're a Democrat, then you think men can get pregnant, and you think that there's too much inequity and there's too much there's too much racism. And if you're on the right, you think that we got to close the borders, and you think that abortion is murder. It's like, isn't there some sort of like a compromise where there's a rational center where people recognize that, like, no, there's a lot of this behavior is just because people are scared and weak, and you should just leave people the fuck alone.
So, yeah, this is Joe's version of centrism here. And you look at the list of things that he puts in opposition of the things that you must believe to be on one side or the other. You know, controlling abortion access versus limiting immigration, restricting guns versus restricting drugs. These are the kind of the opposites that he's setting up. I also think it's kind of adorable that he thinks the Democrats, that the left wing generally are all fully on the same page about the rights of trans people. Like, I fucking wish that was the case. How many left wing groups have we seen torn apart over over the incursions of TERFs and things like that?
Man.
But bear in mind that Joe today is all for closing the border and limiting immigration fully, to the point where he's happy to accept making abortion illegal as a price for that. So he's the one making decisions here. You know, he also doesn't accept that there's too much racism anymore, and he doesn't seem to see that inequality is a problem when he's interviewing billionaires.
Right.
So all the issues that he's setting up of, like, people think you've got to choose between one or the other, he's made all of his choices on that. The very thing that he says you don't need to do, Joe Rogan will definitely go on and do. And I don't think that's a sign that in a couple of years after this interview, he'll have made those decisions and sacrificed some things for others. I don't think it's a sign that he's really changed, that Joe is different. I think it's a sign that he's all about this kind of talk until the chips are down, at which point we found out, and maybe even he finds out, what actually matters to him. And that centrism resolves into a one side or other, the part that really appeals to him.
Yeah, it's like when you talked about Robert Kennedy. You said that there's certain things that matter to him more than other things, and his care for poor people was discarded for his hatred of vaccines. Next clip is that election tampering seems to be a bipartisan issue.
I think it's interchangeable. I mean, it was during the Bush administration, it was the right. During the Bush administration, all the fears about election tampering were about the right. There was an HBO documentary called Hacking Democracy, and it was all about the Bush administration stealing the vote. And it was all about the Diebold voting machines. And they had shown in this documentary that there was a third-party access. So instead of just like you vote and I count your vote, there was actually the room for a third party to put information in that would manipulate the number. And they showed it, and they demonstrated it on the show, and everybody was terrified. Oh my God, the Republicans are stealing the vote. And now it's like Katie Hobbs and, you know, Carrie Lake in Arizona. It's like the Democrats are stealing the vote, and they're all the mail-in ballots. The Democrats are rigging the vote. Like, it's a puppet show. It's the old Bill Hicks joke. It's like, I believe in the puppet on the left. Well, the puppet on the right is more to my liking. Like, hey, there's one guy holding both puppets. Like, that's the old Bill Hicks joke, and that's kind of what the fuck is going on. And we get caught up in these ideological battles, and all the while they're inching us closer to nuclear war. They're pushing dangerous pharmaceutical drugs into our lives. They're instituting a centralized digital currency and a credit score system, and controlling people and locking people down, and establishing narratives that are not based on fact at all. But if you don't follow lockstep with that narrative, you're fucked and you're out of a job. And so everybody doesn't know what to do. Next thing you know, we have something that's very similar to what's going on in China. And that can happen. We're not that far away from something like that happening here. All it would take is a large disaster, some sort of an attack, some sort of a terrible scenario where a bunch of people died and they had to change the rules in order to protect us. And next thing you know, you're fucked.
It's like declaring a national emergency for immigration, right, Joe? Isn't that what you're describing at the very end? Why aren't you screaming from the watchtower for that one?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'd argue it's way more of a risk that you become more like Russia than China. I think that's the direction that you're likely to go.
At least if we were China, we'd be an economic power.
But, you know, what he's arguing here is, you know, both sides are the same. You know, if you're not watching, you're not careful, both sides are the same. That's why both sides were equally likely to bring America to the brink of nuclear war. So vote Trump, guys, because you might as well at this point.
Yeah. We want to include this last clip, and it is a little both sidesism, but it has a very interesting call forward in it that we want to play for people.
No one can monetize the idea that if you stay healthy, if you eat well, I don't think there are serious reasons why we couldn't organize the entire way that food is provided for people and what our modality is around food. Yeah. Oh my God, I had that guy come on, I don't know if you know him, I can't remember, Casey Means, Callie Means, this dude that used to work at Coca-Cola. He said
I saw that on your show.
Yeah, like if you eliminated processed foods, you wouldn't have diabetes, heart disease, or cancer possibly eliminating it. So systemically we're eating things. Systemically we're not using the body correctly.
It sounds an awful lot like Russell Brand isn't used to putting Coca-Cola after Coke there, to be honest. I think when he talks about Coke, it isn't normally followed by Coca-Cola. But the thing is this how Joe came to know the Mean siblings here?
I don't know. I didn't realize that they had sort of been weaving their web a little longer than we had thought, because we heard it with it was, where did it was from RFK, I think, right? Wasn't it?
It was
from
RFK, yeah. And,
so
and maybe Tucker Carlson. I know that she was
Tucker Carlson. So again, it's just like these little threads from these people, they filter their way through this right-wing ecosystem.
Yeah, they really do. And it's really interesting that, like Joe is saying, I saw it. He doesn't say, oh, I know their work, I know who they are. He said, I saw them on the show. So, it also says that Joe is using Russell Brand as a source here. And we've seen this, that Joe's booking policy is so informed by the media that he consumes that if someone's on Tucker, he'll bring them on his show. If someone's on Brand, eventually on his show. This big web that they have, this big web that they're weaving across all of the different activists here, the web's getting larger. But, at least it's equally spaced across the left and the right. There's zero biases. If anything, the web is actually above all the left-right stuff, which is why almost everybody in it is a right-wing activist.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on to our toolbox section.
Maybe it's a thing that one day human beings will have as in our natural toolbox.
So for the toolbox this time, we've created a brand new logical fallacy, or we didn't actually. We're just recognizing what Russell Brand does. It's a thing we're calling brandstanding, and this is specifically related to the Gish Gallop.
Yeah, exactly. We couldn't quite find the right term for it in things that existed. It's a bit like a Gish Gallop. So a Gish Gallop is where you you throw out lots of different arguments in a very quick succession, and therefore the person you're arguing with, or the person who's going to sort of go through what you're saying, hasn't got time to debunk everything. And then anything they didn't debunk in the minds of the audience kind of stands. He said he managed to argue against these three things, but he never said anything about these two over here, so these two must be true. What Brand does is a sort of modified version of the Gish Gallop, which is also a little bit similar to like a jargon blitz or something like this. Because what he's doing is, he's not throwing out too many ideas for you to bunk them all. What he's actually doing is running through lots and lots of different ideas in quick succession, and then connecting them together, even though they're quite disparate, connect them together with very flowery rhetoric and pretentious vocabulary, so that you don't notice the joins from one idea to another. And you can't stop to then question, are these ideas connected? Right. Is there a logical flow through there? And is any of this actually true? So we've called this brandstanding.
Yeah, and so we're going to get started. They spend a lot of this episode talking about COVID, talking about ivermectin, et cetera, et cetera. So this is one of those clips, starts about 28 minutes in, and they talk about ivermectin.
They had the option of saying, look, we don't know, that there's no evidence as yet that ivermectin is effective in these spaces because no one's trialing it, because there's no money in it, because science is a subset of big pharma and the economic imperative's the right thing. No one's doing experiments into natural immunity because natural immunity is not profitable. No one's doing those experiments are not being underwritten. There's no clinical trials for that because no one wants that data for vitamin D or for steroids or for all of the things that came out as ultimately effective once the profits have been gleaned. And then how can you expect to maintain the authority? How can you expect to sit behind those logos of CNN and MSNBC and claim that kind of piety and certainty? And the way that they were outraged by it was astonishing, like a kind of a how dare you have this credibility? How dare people listen to you? And I think that it's precisely because of a willingness to listen one day to a left-wing person, a right-wing person, some people with some crazy theories, some people talking about Egypt, some people talking about MMA. That's how people are now. People don't want that kind of centrist centralized authority. It's over because of the way that technology has afforded people access to a variety of news sources, and a counter-narrative for any story can emerge almost at the same speed as the narrative. So now the price of authority is legitimacy. Authority has to be legit.
Okay, so welcome to brandstanding. Look what he's doing here. He's spinning this grand narrative. He's doing all this big talk, and look at what he's pulling together. The trials weren't done on ivermectin because nobody is paying for them, and you can't make money out of natural immunity because science is a subset of big pharma, and natural immunity won't make money for big pharma. And also CNN and MSNBC, they knew all of that, and they silenced any dissent, and they attacked Joe for being so credible. But Joe listens to so many different people that he's got an earned decentralized authority in this new emerging media buffet where your only currency is legitimacy. But all of that talk is to hide the fact that there was no reason to think ivermectin would be effective for COVID, given that it's an anti-parasite. And to push it during a pandemic was irresponsible for that reason. That is why he was why Joe and Russell Brand were criticized for pushing ivermectin.
Yeah, exactly. And he says there's no experiments on natural immunity. And that's just not true. It took me literally 10 seconds to find 2 different papers on this. They talk about whether natural immunity is effective against COVID, how effective it is, and what we should expect when we get natural immunity, et cetera, et cetera. So you can take a look at them. They're in the show notes. But this is Russell Brand saying they're not doing this thing, and it's very obvious they were looking at those things. Now, you can't just run a trial on natural immunity because that seems like it would be unethical to be like, well, we're just going to pick a bunch of people and you're not going to be able to protect yourself, and then we're going to see how bad this disease ravages you. That's not something you can do. So if that's what he's suggesting, they wouldn't do that because that's unethical, man.
Yeah, and can you imagine if that trial was done that way? What people like Russell Brand and Joe Rogan would say about Big Pharma, that they knew they had a treatment that would help, and they just let people die from it because they had they wanted to publish a study. It can be spun either way.
Yeah.
And then you just break down the various things he said in this kind of long bit of brandstanding. He said science is just a subset of Big Pharma. Sounds like a really impressive. What a fun sentence to say, how grand it sounds. But think about it. Science, the very process of trying to figure out what is true and what isn't from first principles, is part of Big Pharma. Science is massive. Not all of it is Big Pharma. The Artemis mission that just flew around the back of the moon involved a lot of science. Was that Big Pharma? Physics, the discipline of physics, is that Big Pharma? Like, there's a lot of stuff that isn't anything to do with the pharmaceutical companies, but that all, he's trying to make you not, try to avoid you thinking of that because that punctures his story. And then he's talking about CNN, and he's offered nothing to prove that CNN knew that he and Joe Rogan were right about ivermectin, even though, you just showed that they were wrong about ivermectin and natural immunity, things like that, that those studies were actually done. But they're saying that, CNN knew it, and therefore they attacked Joe to cover for the powers that be. But, Joe couldn't be attacked because he's so open to people. He'll talk to anyone, except even by 2023, Joe didn't have a willingness to listen to a range of people.
That true?
That's also just cover.
Yeah.
They've just showed as well, he talks about, that Joe can talk to anyone across the spectrum. They've just showed that they can't even recognize that Tucker Carlson is right wing.
Yeah.
So when they say that Joe talks to people on the left and the right, what do they mean by that if they can't identify right wing? Brand has spent the entire interview telling us that the left wing and the right wing are ultimately the same thing. So by his rhetoric, Joe's viewpoint diversity ranges all the way from one side to the same side wearing a fake mustache. Like, none of this holds up. For all the flair and the flower and the fluidity and his rule of threes and his use of, synonyms, nothing Brand has just said holds together at all. And the central points of it can be easily disproven if he bothered to look at it at all. And he's hoping you won't, because there's so much window dressing around it that you can't notice his points are nonsense.
Brand powers down for a few minutes, and then he powers back up to talk about placebos, hypnosis, war, and big pharma in one big brand stand.
I heard this thing that guy, Pavlov of the dogs, like he did other experimentation, the results of which were that 20% of people are highly susceptible to hypnosis and similarly highly susceptible to placebos. Like 20% of people, if you give them placebos, it will be effective under the right conditions or whatever. And the same with hypnosis. And 20% of people will not be hypnotized and will not respond to placebos. The middle 60% is where propaganda operates. How many of that middle 60% can you persuade? And I was just astonished that authoritarianism could suddenly be repackaged in this manner. That authoritarianism could tell you that war is a good thing. That authoritarianism can tell you that big pharma is a good thing. That being locked in your home is a good thing. And also all the pieces of evidence sort of fell away from it. Oh no, natural immunity is effective. Oh no, there are adverse events. Oh, there are cases of myocarditis. Oh no, there are like every single bit of masks aren't working. All of it just started to fall apart, and somehow they're expecting the eligibility of their authority to have maintained in spite of everything, the edifice cracking open.
I mean, this is just a lot, but I'm just going to point out, but Pavlov, he's talking about Pavlov, you proved a thing about placebos. Pavlov died in 1936, so Brand's science on placebos is like a century out of date, but it doesn't matter because it's a name that he remembers, and it's got something to do with dogs, so that's quite a memorable thing. People will know it.
He goes through a rapid fire of the things that we're supposed to, that we all believe, that somehow war is a good thing. Nobody's saying war is a good thing. We're against war, which is what Russia did to Ukraine, by the way. Yep. They started a war with them. That's why people were against it. But the way he frames it, he makes it seem like, oh, we're somehow looking forward to that war and we're happy that that war was happening. He says everyone's for big pharma. That's just not true. We want regulation on big pharma, but we also would love to have medications that are safe and effective. Those are important things. So we shouldn't just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, we can't have pharmaceuticals anymore because they can't be trusted. No, we should just regulate them better. That's all. We should actually do those sorts of things instead of electing people who strip those regulations away. He says that people like to be locked into their homes. That's totally not true. Everybody just thought that that was the safest thing that we could do at the moment. There were a lot of people complaining about it. They didn't want to do it, but they thought, hey, this is the safest thing I can do for me and my family and maybe for others right now. That's all it is. But he wants to try to shift it so it makes it seem like this is what was in the collective consciousness by just throwing these straw men at you rapid fire with his brandstanding. Now he's going to talk about corporatization of government.
I feel that in a way what the pandemic did was it revealed the long con of corporatization of government. That if over the last 50, 60 years, government has become increasingly corporatized, that democracy has become increasingly hollowed out and irrelevant, it just took a crisis event to reveal the extent to which that had taken place. Now, the people that are in the outreaches and some of the people in the comments below will talk about, no, the whole thing is staged. It's a global the event. The whole thing has been put in place in order to bring about social credit scores and more surveillance and to facilitate lockdowns. And those are the things that are very, very difficult to prove. But what I think you can demonstrate is over the last 50, 60 years, through lobbying and demonstrable means, corporations have had more and more ability to exert, influence and downright control government policy, regardless of which party is in power. And then a crisis event took place and the momentum that carried it through, like governments like control. That's what governments are about, is authority. But big corporations like profit. That's what they're about. And those two things came together. So the solution that was suggested is, well, we can exert control through lockdowns and potentially coming as close as, damn it, to mandate in medicines. They can benefit. The indemnity that they were granted, it was a kind of a perfect storm and perfect revelation.
Okay, so there's a part, we're going to get into his kind of full brandstanding here, but notice he says, there are people in the comments who will say that the whole thing, the pandemic, was staged. Those are things that are very, very difficult to prove. That's what I'd call a soft endorsement for the idea that the pandemic was staged and deliberately engineered. That isn't a disagreement with that idea. That's I can't necessarily say that that's definitely true.
Good point.
He does a lot of this in his own show. Is like, there's times that he won't come up straight out and endorse a conspiracy theory, but he'll sort of wink towards it so that if you believed in it, you might still think he's fully on side with you, but he's got plausible deniability.
Right.
But yeah. From here, he runs through corporations have taken over government, therefore democracies are increasingly irrelevant, and COVID proved that, and COVID might even have been staged in order to bring about social credit scores, but even if it wasn't staged, it never mattered which party was in power, and therefore the government and corporations deliberately did the lockdown thing in order to benefit. But did governments benefit from the lockdown? How many governments increased their power after the lockdown? Social credit scores didn't come in my country, your country, any of the countries I'm aware of. The hit to the economy actually caused major impacts that actually led to a lot of governments losing at the next election. So the governments that brought the lockdowns in were often punished at the polls because of the hit to the economy. Look at this for a second, this all starts to fall apart. But that doesn't matter because regardless of who's in charge, it's all the same, right? It doesn't matter who's in charge and whether the government changes, except is America right now the same as it was under Biden? Was America under Trump first term the same as it was under Obama? Was there no differences between the two? I'd argue there was stark contrast between those various administrations. And those contrasts completely undermine his point if you pause and actually think about it. But you can't, because it all just keeps rolling on. It all keeps rolling on, and you're not given the time to stop and investigate or interrogate any individual part of his role here. And then he caps off with, it was kind of a perfect storm and a perfect revelation. Beyond a flourish, what does that mean? We know what a perfect storm is. It's like all the combinations came together, all the possible factors came together at exactly the right time. But a perfect revelation? COVID was a perfect revelation? What do you mean by that? We can't ask because he's going to roll on by.
Yeah. Here he is doing it again. About 10 minutes later, he talks about values.
I suppose this is where it's a requirement to have some genuine values like clemency, compassion, forgiveness, things that also seem to be getting extracted out of the culture. It's not like there's a set of principles that people have recourse to, a set of binding ideals. It feels to me like that the only safeguard at this point is some sort of resolute democracy to say, we're thinking that the best thing would be 15-minute cities. But of course, you can vote for whether you want your city to be a 15-minute. We're thinking the best thing might be this medication. But of course, you can vote. What you don't want is the WHO determining that in the next pandemic, they have the right to implement by their votes contained within the WHO, like lockdown measures, medication measures, which is something that they're lobbying for currently, I understand. Less and less democracy, more and more ability for unelected globalist, I would have to say globalist organizations to assert political influence over nations. And that's what we saw here. And like when you know that the WHO's second biggest funder is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and he invests so heavily into these facts, again, like stuff that gets called conspiracy theory, but you can look at the evidence is there.
The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation profited millions of dollars on the vaccines.
There's a piece about clemency at the very beginning that he says, and I want to put a little bit of light on what he says there because we cut, we didn't have enough time to play all the tape, and this is a response to Joe talking. Joe, in a previous bit of tape here, he says, we need to just forgive all those people who were so fucking wrong about COVID. Every one of these people who didn't think the vaccine was going to kill you, who thought that, you should wear a mask and how wrong they are and how terrible they did, like all the tyranny that they enforced on us. We just need clemency. We need to forgive them for all these things. And really what they're saying is we want to forgive them because they thought I was an asshole for not following public health. That's what we want to do. We want to forgive them because they thought I was a jerk because of that. That's what they're talking about there at the very beginning of this. And again, Brand is going to weave in a ton of stuff, and he's eventually going to fall on 15-minute cities. 15-minute cities are just about making a city that's not around cars. It's not tyranny. It's zoning, man.
And he ends that clip by saying, the stuff that gets called conspiracy, you can look for all that we've talked about, all that gets called conspiracy theory. But if you look at the evidence is there, and is the evidence there? Because what we just saw was a rush through from talking about how good values like compassion are being lost, but you need compassion to safeguard against 15-minute cities. So there should be item line referenda on how to respond to a virus because the WHO want to enforce lockdown measures and forced vaccination, and they're funded by Bill Gates.
When you list it out, it's amazing.
Yeah, none of that is evidence. It's not even a coherent argument.
It's not.
It's just a buffet of conspiratorial nonsense. And if we pause and take it slow and dissect, we can ask questions like, would it make sense to have a referendum before rolling out a treatment for an infectious disease that is spreading like wildfire around the entire world and killing people? I'd argue you don't have time to pause and give that referendum. And if you did, how do you make sure that referendum, people are fully informed enough to know exactly what the treatment is because medicine's complicated? Yeah. Did the World Health Organization try and institute any lockdowns anywhere in the world? As far as I'm aware, all the lockdowns that were instituted were advised by science and enforced by governments, and the WHO didn't have any impact on enforcing that anywhere. I haven't seen evidence that the WHO are trying to get the powers to be able to lock countries down en masse. What is Bill Gates' link to lockdowns and 15-minute cities, Russell?
Yeah.
You don't want to ask these questions because you just want to roll through and do your kind of conspiratorial jazz talk.
Yeah. And speaking of which, this is a perfect example of this. This happens much later on in the show. He goes back to his brandstanding.
You're talking, I believe, about the spirit, and the word spirituality and the word discipline have been continually paired. Christ's followers are the disciples. It's a discipline.
Yeah.
You have to marshal the spirit. The spirit has to be controlled, otherwise the spirit will not be your friend. And I feel like the commodification, and perhaps you could even argue feminization of spirituality. Either you have orthodox spiritualities that tend to be patriarchal. I'm talking about the sort of the desert faiths, the Christianity, the Judaism, and the Islam. Certainly many people would argue that there's if not misogynistic, then patriarchal aspects to that. It's interesting that New Age spirituality is regarded as somewhat feminine and is certainly by and large commodified. It becomes about, purchasing a pair of leggings, purchasing a dream catcher or a crystal. It doesn't have that aspect of discipline that is about the ability to prioritize your spiritual state over your physical state.
Yes.
This is the deeper reality, what's happening in here. And when you start bringing up interdimensional travel and psychedelics, you start to recognize, this is an important space for me.
This is just word jazz.
It is.
This is just throwing out ideas.
Absolutely.
And again, none of this is really based in anything at all. He says, discipline comes from Christ followers, the disciples. That's where discipline comes from. Spirituality and discipline are always kind of paired together. A disciple doesn't come from discipline. Those two words, they share a common root in the Latin verb to learn, but they don't kind of come from one another. They're kind of they're grandchildren of the verb discere, to learn. So it comes down into discipline is sort of learning and being disciplined in that kind of way. And disciples, they were learners from Christ. It's not about them being disciplined in any kind of way here. And then, he's saying things like the commodification and perhaps you could even argue the feminization of spirituality. And it's just words that he thinks sound good in order, but they're not coherent arguments. This is not designed to inform anybody. This is designed to bamboozle them so you don't question whether there's any substance to any of this. I know this one's going to be a long clip, but I thought it's really worth leaving in because I think this is a perfect example of Russell Brand at his most brandstandy. It's a long clip, but you can see just how many topics he will skip through on this next clip, which comes near about halfway through the show.
Yeah, and I did speed this clip up a tiny bit because it is very long. So recognize that he's not just talking fast. This is cutting sort of some of the pauses out in his speech. You don't need to send me a message to say you don't like shortened clips. I'm not taking editorial decisions from the audience.
Yeah.
I'm deciding to actually speed this up on my own.
This is just an illustration of his style as much as anything else.
I suppose one of the other tensions is if you have small state, what regulates corporate power? Those are there are big questions that once you sort of say, this don't work no more, I want something different.
So what does work?
Yeah, you are confronted with, how do you do that? How do you regulate behemoths like Apple and these new titans that put the steel and energy giants of a century ago in the shadows with their might and again with their, as you cited earlier, their ability to create exploitation and something akin to slavery in the modern world. Forget historic slavery. What is the collective force that opposes that? And I can't help but feel that this technology, if we were released of the need for relentless progressivism and advancement only in order to fuel endless consuming, that this technology could be used to create more democracy, more freedom, more ability to interact in how your community is run. If not the kind of universal credit society and the kind of atrophy that suggests and the kind of apathy that suggests and the disconnection that suggests, some more leisurely form of awakened, technologically advanced, leisure-led society where people have more time to create truly reflective culture, where the tropes that are used in the conversation around diversity of genuinely different cultures cohabiting, a genuine and real melting pot where you accept that people eat different food, have different sex lives, have different beliefs, that is a possibility. I suppose that in a way, the amount of authority that was asserted during the pandemic, the amount of effort that's put into censoring mainstream narratives, the amount of effort that's put into creating terms, new language to control, smear and censor opposing voices, suggests that they consider it a legitimate threat that alternative views could take hold, that new alliances could take place, that people would consider different ways of being. There's a brilliant philosopher, he's dead now, Mark Fisher, he was of the left. He coined the term capitalist realism, that we have been taught that this is the only model of reality there is. People find it easier to envisage the end of the world than the end of capitalism. That there could be a new economic system that we could live within. And we all know now that capitalism as it was intended doesn't exist anymore anyway. Like, certainly not after what happened in 2008. Simple, I make this thing, trading, it growing, ingenuity, entrepreneurship. It's such a cronyist, supporting energy companies, supplementing them, ensuring that they make profits when how can you have energy companies that profit when there's an energy crisis, military industrial complex that profits when there's a war, pharmaceutical companies that profit when there's a pandemic? You're creating the necessity for ongoing crisis.
Yes.
If the elites in a society benefit from situations that are detrimental to everybody else, that's what reality is going to become. That's what reality has become.
That's such an important point because that's almost undeniable.
Which point?
Almost undeniable. That's almost undeniable. Is it almost undeniable? From my perspective, that was a 4-minute spiraling monologue that actually opened like 30 seconds earlier, because we cut the clip down even that clip was clipped down. It opened 30 seconds earlier with him saying he was omniscient. Like, if my own version of reality is only accessed through my mind, so I'm omniscient in my reality. And that got him into his question, which was the start of this clip, which was, how can a small government state regulate big tech? And that was the brand-standing answer
That was
to
the
it.
answer. Yeah. Amazing.
Let's wrap it up with that. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you very much. You're a beautiful person.
All right, Marsh, here we are. End of the show. Russell Brand, anything good?
In this conversation, look, there's parts of this conversation where Joe talks about, and even Russell talks about exercise and how it's good for you. They talk about how Brand's been doing some martial arts and finds that quite good for him mentally as well as physically. And Joe talks about the value of exercise and challenging yourself. And look, we're going to joke about that a little bit, but he actually instills that value in his children. And while we'll make a bit of fun about that in the gloves off the record section, I think that's still a good value to instill in your children, the value of going out and exercising and things. Joe also talks reasonably well about a non-toxic version of masculinity at one point, in opposition, directly, explicitly in opposition to the likes of Andrew Tate.
Yeah.
He says about how being masculine doesn't mean you should hate women in any way. And I think that's good. I think Joe actually believes that. But unfortunately, as we've seen before, while he might be against explicit misogyny, he's not great at recognizing some of his own negative views of women. But at least he thinks that he can explicitly state to his audience that hating women is not a masculine trait.
Yeah, that was actually positive. There's a couple of moments in there that are actually genuinely positive. Brand sort of made his splash on a lot of atheist communities. I don't know if he had a lot of atheist crossover stuff, but he definitely made a big splash in a lot of the atheist communities. I was hearing a lot about him back in the day. And actually, I have been sort of susceptible, and I will recognize I was susceptible to falling for some of the people who were outspoken atheists back in the day. So Sam Harris is a perfect example. I actually liked Sam Harris a long time ago. I thought Sam Harris had some interesting things to say. Same thing with Christopher Hitchens. I thought Christopher Hitchens had some really interesting things to say. I did not even listen to a moment of Russell Brand. Actually, I said to Marsh before we started recording, I thought he was Australian. I had no idea that he's English. I didn't even know, because I never even listened to a moment of him. And after listening to that, I can say I am very glad that I missed him.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, he was never an atheist. He'd espouse Buddhism, but he'd always wear a very obvious cross around his neck. So he's always kind of the very superficial trappings of spirituality.
It's weird though, because I heard about him through atheist communities a lot.
Yeah.
It was a very strange crossover.
I think those communities were trained to offer too much respect to people who had a wide vocabulary and an engaging delivery. I think
you're right.
Sounds like look at the brand standing. He sounds like he's smart. He isn't. I'd also point out that him being now persona non grata has denied us Get Me to the Greek 2, the sequel to his previous film. So that is another good thing. That's another something good to come from all of this. There isn't a sequel to that.
You know, I was worried we crossed over into the different bad dimension, but now that you say that, Marsh, I'm good with Hillary Clinton losing in 2016. All right, that's going to wrap it up for the show this week. Don't send me your message. I'm not good with Hillary Clinton losing in 2016. It's going to wrap it up for the show this week. Remember that you can access more than a half an hour of bonus content every single week for as little as $1 an episode by subscribing at patreon.com/NoRogan. Meanwhile, you can hear more from me at Cognitive Dissonance and Citation Needed, and more from Marsh at Skeptics with a K and the Skeptic podcast. And we're going to be back next week for a little more The No Rogan Experience.
If you love the show, please rate and share it. If you want to get in touch with us, become a patron, or check out the show notes, go to norogan.com. KNOWROGAN.com.